Hey everybody. Wanted to do a quick message for just people and tell you a little bit about what's going on, not only with the podcast, but in my head and all that good stuff. If you noticed, the podcast has been getting some pretty good episodes consistently out there, thanks to the year of consistency. If you were curious about what that was all about, um, I think our year of consistency uh, was a big way to help out with that. Um, I think just having a lot of more dedication to what I was doing and sticking to a consistent schedule. But that's been covered in episodes. I want to talk more about this. If I've discovered anything in recent weeks, if not months, it's that there is a um, I really appreciate diversification in what I'm doing much more than I had previously. I don't think I had a really solid uh, appreciation for diversifying um, what you're doing. Hold on one second. Let's see if this will work better. Much better. Okay. So, I'm really much more appreciative of diversification, and not just in a financial setting like a diversified portfolio. I'm speaking more of a diversified means of communication, modes of communication. I'll be honest. Before I started the Church Nerd, I had done a lot of video editing, and so that was most of where my experience was, and then a teeny bit of audio editing. In fact, most of my audio editing was because of videos that I was making. But I also knew that I had a great love of listening to podcasts, and that I knew that if I was going to make videos on YouTube, for example, that I would spend far too much time perfecting the videos, and that they would happen much less frequently. I would think of them as precious little gems, and I would work on them endlessly, and they would never be perfect, so they would never get published. Um, if anything, having a podcast and just being limited to audio only solved a lot of those problems that I would have wanting to basically make little, independent films for every little subject. Um, do I think the podcast is a perfect polished jewel? No, not at all. If you want that level of perfection in audio podcasting, I direct you to pretty much anything done by Radiolab, or any one of those big attention grabbing, nation capturing podcasts like S Town, and those kinds of podcasts that really capture the whole national attention. They're done beautifully, and they're done by professionals who are journalists. Go listen to those. But then when you're done with that, come listen to me. Um, and also, I knew that for example, lots of podcasts um, also had YouTube channels that were basically just um, the audio from their show played on a video. Um, and I've dabbled still with making some videos. And likewise, I know that a lot of people have been bloggers, and oddly enough, long form writing scares me. Even though now I'm getting more and more comfortable with it, because essentially I write, 1.5 to 2 sermons a week, and do podcast episodes, which, you know, traditionally had been more and more scripted. Like every word was scripted, and I was reading my own script in front of a microphone. I think now I've kind of started stepping back away from that, and I know what I'm going to talk about, and so I'll just kind of free form it, and then um, do that a couple of times, and then find the one I like the best, and then move on to the next part. Um, of course, that means that not every episode is as polished as the first episodes, especially if you look at the earliest episodes. But here they are. Now this is a rambling video, and so I apologize. But I am in a change of mode, and I think that's going to help continue the direction of the podcast. I don't think I'm abandoning anything that I set out to do when I created the podcast. I'm just realizing that I really do have more things to say, and so I'm going to be trying out saying them in different ways. So, wherein I realized I wasn't using the Church Nerd website really at all, except to host the podcast. All of the pages that I had spent so much time making and building, and even the shop that I had built that never really housed any merchandise. It was a good learning experience, but ultimately it was not a useful place. And then I even looked heavily into abandoning the paid abandoning the paid website on Squarespace, and instead doing just a hosted podcast thing like on Acast or Podbean or any one of those services. Libsyn, if you're not familiar, those are services that will host your podcast, give it a home online, and will broadcast your episodes for you through RSS feeds to like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and places like that. And so there are places that will host your podcast. You just don't get the full flexibility of a website that you can make your own. But that being said, you're given a small little sandbox to play in, and they just sort of take care of it for you. So it's much less to worry about. So long story short, I was looking at the website traffic to go in. Were people clicking on other pages like the About page and the book list, which was a kind of a list of references that I had been compiling. I modeled my podcast website after the British History Podcast website, which is BritishHistoryPodcast.com. You should totally check it out. It's a great website. It's a great podcast. So I was definitely modeling after someone who I already admired, and I built up this great, I think pretty good website that was not doing anything. Think of living by yourself, but you're doing it in a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom house with a built-on garage, 2-car garage, and a workshop in the backyard and a pool. Like, that's more house than you need for one person. Likewise, the website was more web hosting than one little podcast needed. And so I was real close to stepping back from that website and instead doing just transferring the podcast over to one of those hosted RSS hosts. Especially because my annual renewal comes up at the end of the month, or during this month. So anyway, but as I really thought about it, I decided to stay with everything right now. So the podcast is still hosted on Squarespace, and that is the biggest expense of this whole endeavor. The microphone is an old purchase from long ago. Owning the name, thechurchnerd.com, is not terribly expensive. Neither are the additional websites I went ahead and got, which were churchnerdpodcast.com and andrewmclarty.com. Those were not hard to hold on to. Paying the annual fee for the Squarespace website is just the biggest chunk of change that the podcast takes up. And so I could save myself, $150, $200 a year by not having a big old website. However, as I was reading, as I've been reading more and more about people who do a lot of social media content, um, a lot of people suggest having a blog, or they grew their YouTube and writing and other creative career. Oh, excuse me. They grew their other creative careers out of um, a blog, and so for me, a blog is a step backwards. It's delving. Usually you'd have a blog, and that would make you have the courage to start a YouTube channel or start a podcast. Me, I had no problem jumping straight into podcast because, frankly, speaking is not my problem. It's long form writing that always scares me. That's kind of why I don't. If I had to preach a sermon, I would much rather just go off the top of my head than write a full manuscript. And yet, I'm finding that I'm writing all of my sermons with a manuscript form, mostly because I'm trying to express complicated ideas that I need to really think through and say clearly, and not worry about trying to memorize it and remember it in my head in the moment. It's just easier, even though I don't like doing it. I find that it ends up being better if I just type it out. That said, preaching without a manuscript or notes, kind of having the story that you know you're going to say in your head, know what the beginning, the middle, and the end are, and just getting through it without any kind of podium or any hindrance in front of you, for me is much easier and actually much more enjoyable. You'd have to ask my congregation if it's more intelligible, but we'll ask them, and I'll get back to you on that. So all this to say, all of this talking to say, that I am going to start making videos, writing blog posts, doing things that help tell the story of this kind of work. Not that the Church Nerd is going to be this is how a new clergy person does her or his job, or this is the guide to how to do church work or parish work. I could be making much more content that is, technology review based or whatever kind of interests me. And it's not to say that it's going to be it's going to splinter me away from the work I'm already doing here in this church. I think if in any way it's going to kind of show my work in a safe, constructive way that doesn't, of course, go into any too much detail about personal stuff. Keep people's spiritual lives to themselves. But I've got things I'm already doing that would be good content. Like we just got our books in for our Lenten discipline. They were a little late, obviously, but I'm going to be doing a review of this book for the podcast because I'm already going to be working on it for the parish. Likewise, Mr. Caswell Cook messaged me and said, "Hey, would you please consider doing a review of my book for your podcast?" I said, "Sure." He sent me the book. I got it in the mail today. So there are lots of things that are happening with the Church Nerd Universal. There's just going to be different. So expect some new stuff. And in a lot of ways, these are tests. Tests to see if writing regularly proves that there are things that need to be said, and how those, help the overall mission of the Church Nerd, which is to explore those little corners of the church that are just fun and interesting, and are and spark the curiosity of those who like to learn, like me. If anything, I'm the master of nothing, but I'm a jack of many trades, and so that is my. That's my promise to you: is that to be a lovely amateur who comes in and shows love. In fact, French for amateur is a French word for love. Someone who has a love for a given topic, a love for learning, a love for the exploration of it. And I think that's really kind of the purpose of the podcast. And the work of the church nerd is to just nerd out over stuff about the church, and to take delight in the practice of it, in the journey of learning, the exercise of learning more. So that's my my conversation for y'all today. This stream is being shared simultaneously on YouTube, Facebook, and Patreon. If you find that there is a value added to your life from this kind of sharing, whether it's talking about email apps or saints feast days or book reviews or what have you, if you feel that you've added something, some value has been added into your life, please consider going on to Patreon and donating $1 a week or $1 a month. Click on the $5 option to help me buy some new recording equipment. Kind of excited about that. I'm learning a new audio editing program called Reaper, which is so nice. So that's fun. And also, I'm really excited about getting more audience feedback, and that could be what kinds of episodes you want to see. We've done some interview episodes. We've also done some media like response, like a response to a movie or something like that. So if that's something that you want more of, or if there's something you haven't seen yet that you're like, hey, Andrew, you should, do something like this, please let me know. I'm always happy to do those kinds of things. All right. Well, that's my message for us today. We'll see what the blog looks like, and what the vlog looks like, and see what videos come out of it. Don't forget to. Also, I forgot to mention, if you become a patron, there is a separate patron podcast, which is full of its own episodes that are really, really good. It's called the Church Nerdiest Podcast. It's even nerdier than the regular podcast. And right now it is a separate standalone podcast. You can subscribe to it. You can go on whatever your podcast provider is. Type in the Church Nerdiest superlative, and you'll see a separate podcast. It's a members-only podcast. And you can access that through Patreon. Now, I'm in the process of learning how I can actually merge those two RSS feeds together. So that way, perhaps, maybe, that the Church Nerdiest could just be absorbed into the Church Nerd, and those members-only episodes will just come out as a special episode that's accessed through Patreon, and you don't have to be subscribed to a second whole podcast. But as it stands right now, they're just set up as two different podcasts with different artwork, and they're pretty cool. All right, so if you consider, if this is giving you value, please consider sponsoring the effort to keep the lights on, so to speak. And if there are episodes or content or issues or topics that you want discussed or explored, or questions you want answered about the church, or not about the church, please let me know. Also, new email. If you type in Andrew at thechurchnerd.com, that will email me. So there is a new podcast email, Andrew at thechurchnerd.